Welcome to episode 602 of the Barcelona podcast, brought to you by the Blue Wire Podcast Network. I'm Dan Hilton, and I do really appreciate the patience. This 2-week break was, I think, the longest I've ever taken since I started the podcast with Frances back in 2017. So again, I really do appreciate the patience and how long it has been since you've heard from me. I do actually have some fun things planned for the near future and this season. And in the meantime, I did have to change locations. I watched my internet cut in and out for a few days, and I still tried to keep an eye on Barcelona. And for those watching, you can probably see the beads of sweat. The air conditioning situation is still in flux as well, which does make it even more frustrating because I got to turn all the fans off and all the air conditioning and all that off to record these shows. So if Nico Williams had been signed, I definitely would have done some kind of emergency show, but he never was. So I never had to, and he may not be, at least until next season. So now with El Clasico this weekend, I would like to announce, and if you don't take anything away from the show, just take this, that this weekend, I will be doing a watch-along for the game with a company called Tifo. I did try the test that we had a few people show up for, so thank you to Tamir and those who showed up for that. The rain delay, then I had to go to work halfway through, so it was an odd situation on Tuesday night, but things should be better for the watch-along this weekend. And it's not the Tifo that is with the Athletic, it's a different Tifo, so you can sign up and join me for that in the show notes or the description with the promo code holaculers. Again, that is holaculers, HOLACULERS. It's free to join, and it would really help me out as well. I won't be doing it for every game this season, and just as a programming note for this one, I will be starting the watch along somewhere midway through the first half. So almost the opposite of the other one. I won't be there for the pre-match stuff or for some of the first half, but at least midway through the first half, I'm going to jump on and then we'll do the second half. And then we'll also do an extended post game afterwards where we can really get into those conversations. So that should all be a bit of fun. It'll also be promoted on Discord, Patreon, or the Facebook closed group. So if you're in any of those groups, that's a way to get in there. Again, the promo code, you can sign up for free and you join me in that adventure. So I am flying solo today, and I felt like we had to get at least one show out talking about that Man City preseason match. And I'm not doing a 5 headlines or anything of that, but really one big question I'd like to answer instead that it feels like it's still too early to answer, but hey, that's what you got to do with all this content. So with that said, the big question is, what did we learn from Hansi Flick's first match in charge? This isn't going to be a list or anything, as I said, just a few topics that I want to hit before we move on to El Clasico. And first off, let's talk about formation without the ball. So the really fun stuff, as you know, because I do want to talk about controlling the tempo of a match with the ball. And I think that will be more clear against Real Madrid. But it's pretty clear from the jump. And maybe it was just that this is a really young group and things will change with different personnel. But it seems highly likely that Barca will defend in a 4-4-2 and keep things nice and narrow against the top sides that may have more of the ball than they did. And we saw that even under Xavi last season. Man City is, of course, when talking about having the ball, the very top of that list in that category. So, as I said, El Clasico will be really interesting to see how that, not even possession stat, but control of a game plays out. Flick for this game used a medium block. It was compact, yes, but that the benefit of having a really technical side playing so compact is that you can break forward with short and decisive passing quicker since players are closer together. And as journalist Fermin Suarez pointed out, Marc Casado was at the center of it all, and that's why Culés were so excited about him. His association with Pablo Torre was essential in Torre receiving the ball to the proper shoulder to turn and attack through the middle. Same with Pau Victor. Dropping him in meant that he was attracting attention once the ball was turned over. So this is without the ball. Thus also creating that space through the middle for Torre to then turn and dribble into. Then Victor could run straight at Calvin Phillips, who is a top player. Well, maybe he didn't have the best season, but we know he's capable of being a really good player, but he's also not a center back. And Gvardiol had some good moments with the ball, but as a center back, which he also doesn't usually play as a proper center back under Pep, there were some moments defending where he also wasn't having his best game. I'm really excited about the idea, and I do love that I may already be able to say that I have been wrong or could be wrong in the future about Casado and his future at Barcelona. Gabi is a ball winner, and if there's one big takeaway I take from Casado, it's that he is also a ball winner. Pedri, De Jong, and Gundogan are not. And Fermin Lopez is pretty much an attacker and also not a ball winner. I really like the way that Casado was comfortable receiving the ball in all the different phases of play. Sometimes it was Marc Bernal who would drop deeper, closer to the center backs, so Casado would look to receive the ball between the lines. Or if City had dropped deeper, Casado would look to take a risk and distribute the ball to the opposite flank, a position where if you lose it, you should in theory be in the right spot in rest defense to take the ball back. And in those corners, the opposition's corners, I should say, that is the least dangerous spot on the field to lose the ball. He fundamentally looks like a player that will fit with Hansi Flick, I think even more than he would have with Xavi. And that is really exciting for him, and maybe the biggest reason why the club was so willing to allow Sergio Roberto to leave. And speaking of Marc Bernal, I'll let Pep Guardiola use his words instead. He said, I really liked the youngsters. Marc Bernal seemed extraordinary to me, how he controls, how he plays, but they all played incredibly. They do things very well. They know when to run, when to press, when to anticipate. I wish them all the best. Of course, he wasn't just trying to hype up Bernal too much, and he was trying to, pump the brakes, but I think Pep might know what he's talking about with Bernal's future, as did Oscar Lopez before him and Rafa Marquez last season. Physically, he's listed at 6'3", an inch taller than Sergio Busquets, but that's where I'm going to end that comparison. Busquets was a special single pivot, maybe the most special single pivot that the game ever saw. Not necessarily the best player as a defensive midfielder or a pivot, but maybe the most special single pivot that the game ever had. But like Casado, Bernal might be perfectly suited for the double pivot under Flick. The chemistry and association between the two midfielders, that being Casado and Bernal, was fortified last season with Barca Athletic, and you could tell right away how comfortable they were with each other. The trust as to where their movements needed to be when Barca had the ball, staying close, opening their body and their hips for one another, carrying into space when the space was there, and then keeping that balance in case the ball was lost. I think Bernal, at 17, is again going to be a starter with Barca Athletic this season, but I also think he's definitely on the first team bench quite a few times and is absolutely making his first team debut this season. I don't want to get too lost in the number position, 6, 8, 10, but I'd love to stop the Busquets comparisons. I think even after he's entering the preseason now for his first time, honestly, he reminds me a ton, and I mentioned this before, maybe once or twice, that he reminds me a ton of Mikel Moreno, who appears off to Arsenal now, and maybe Barca were fine with that, knowing what they know they have in Bernal. Bernal did look a bit slow out of possession, not physically slow, but just reading the passing lanes a bit slow, and Man City were able to bypass him on one or two occasions. And I think that is defensively even something we saw Pedri improve upon in his time at Barcelona, and other players have improved upon that from the young ages up. And I think that will come through time, but something I will be watching to see if he can improve upon throughout even this preseason. Now let's talk about Pau Victor's goal in the 24th minute, because that was the perfect example of how Flick, I think, wants to attack. And maybe too good of an example because it worked so well. It was patience, but playing with a high tempo when the opportunity presented itself. The goal came after 25 passes, plenty of calm and horizontal movement, probing for that open space. And then, as so many goals at the top level are produced, one touch from Casado to flick on Pablo Torre, then onto Pau Victor, and the ball is in the back of the net. Similar on that Pablo Torre goal, it's a fantastic finish, but it was some calm before the ball goes wide to Gerard Martin. Then a big confusing cross that no Man City player gets to. Vitor Roque, it also rotated to the middle, allowing the near post run and dummy from Pau Victor. City players are worried about the forwards, and the space was there for Pablo Torre behind them. And a good finish from him as well. It was a ton of fun to see Pablo Torre getting to operate in the spot on the field where he became such a big prospect for Racing Santander. And while I'm at it, shout out to Sergi Dominguez for dealing with Erling Haaland. He was, that being Dominguez, a rotation guy for Rafa Marquez last season, not a consummate starter for the B team. But the 19-year-old may have a higher ceiling than I'd initially thought. I didn't even make one of those YouTube 60-second things for him because I wasn't sure that he would be at the club even through the offseason. Either way, that showing will move him up the depth chart. And again, another player that I could be wrong about, which is great to see. Lenglet, meanwhile, will hopefully get his move in the next few days out of the club. And behind them, Naki Pena had some really good saves, especially on that one we had to get a glove on as it was coming across the goal. And if he could be better in the air, he's a fairly compensated backup, and hopefully he's still improving in the air after his deputy duty last season. The other big note in that first half is that the wingers weren't really touchline wingers like we saw under Xavi. Personnel-wise, that wasn't ever going to be the case. Joan Araujo is a right back, but it was interesting to see the switching and positioning of Araujo and Hector Fort on the right side. Both had license to go forward because the other one would then cover for them. And while Fort didn't have his best game, he didn't look out of place or overwhelmed at all either. He played in big matches with the first team last year. And Araujo looked useful, and that's kind of what I want to see from him. Are you showing me enough that Flick is going to keep you around if we'll see about Cancelo and all that stuff? So Fort might be better on the ball, but Araujo is much better positionally, defensively, and supported the shape really well, even though he was technically the right winger in front of Fort in the position that they were in, especially when they were defending in that 4-4-2. Meanwhile, on the left wing, Vitor Roque was the one player that I would say actually struggled in that game. He just doesn't look comfortable out there on the left. His best moments were when Barca had the ball and he got to associate in the space in the middle with Pau Victor, and Victor was the one who got to look good getting on the end of things. Roque then had to defend deep in a medium block on the wing, where he committed some fouls and did not, as I said, look entirely comfortable defending in those positions. And I really wouldn't be surprised, just showing where Flick started him in this match, if he sold permanently this summer to a similar number to what Barca had bought him for, maybe a little bit more than that. So that left wing role where you have to work really, really hard as essential players are all just closing down passing lanes, which means that the wingers have to defend aggressively. And I think while Roque did that, he wasn't clean about it, and I don't know if that position fits him in the long run. But Rafinha, however, may excel at that, and I would be really surprised if the club do push him to Saudi Arabia, but again, he also may be going if Dani Olmo is coming and Rafinha takes a huge number. Who knows what the next few weeks or even days are going to hold on that. On to the second half now. I think I'm done going into what we learned from Flick's first game in charge, and now it's more about which youngsters we might see more of throughout this preseason. Please watch my La Masia tier list from a few weeks ago that is still very relevant, or the 60-second YouTube short bios on those kids that I've been doing that I did a few months ago. I don't know where Alex Valle will fit in this season, but it was interesting to see him do well out of position on the right side instead of his normal left side or left back spot. I think there's more to see from him this preseason, and whether or not he sticks around will depend on transfers in and out. There were positive things from the players that will definitely get time with Barca Athletic this season, including Kim Juniet, Noah Darvic, Guy Fernandez, and Toni Fernandez. But I do see a repetition issue as I try to get excited for all of these players playing in very similar positions, because probably in that double pivot with the midfielder in front, Pedri, Gundogan, Fermin Lopez, Pablo Torre, Juniet, Darvic, and Guy Fernandez, that's 7 players, all play in that same position, or are best in that same position, I should say. And Toni Fernandez also played a ton of that attacking midfielder spot with the U18s as well. But I'll get to him in a second and keep him on the wing in Flick's system, at least while we're doing these numbers. And I know that Juniet also played on the wing in that match, but I do feel like his future is in the middle of the park. But as I said, I don't know how there's time for all of those players to get proper first team opportunities, if you want to call them that. But it also might not be a problem at all, because Pablo Torre may get loaned out again. Juniet will be playing with Barca Athletic this season, and he is still just 17 years old. Guy Fernandez will also play with Barca Athletic, and he's also just 16 years old. And if they both only make a debut with the first team this season, it is a success. But I do think we're going to see Guillermo a few times this season. And Gundogan is turning 34 in October, so that timeline for Guillermo and Gundogan pretty much perfectly fits. And even if Dani Olmo arrives, the midfielders for Barcelona haven't necessarily been the epitome of health. So every time I think there's too many players, Barca's injuries do remind me that you can't ever have too many good and young, aka cheap, options anywhere on the field. And I do think that trio all really got to show you some of what makes them all special individually. Kim Juniet's center of gravity is absurdly low, and he turns so quickly. He also moves the ball out of his feet quickly, and with the right chemistry, can move the ball up the field in small spaces in a blink of an eye. For Darvic, he was the same player that I feel like I saw at times last year for both good and bad. With the ball, it can be very exciting. He finds space well, can dribble, can get fouled, and can deliver a really good ball with his left foot. But the game does still seem a bit fast for him without the ball, and he does hold the ball for a moment longer than he should, especially in transition. If Flick wants him to succeed, though, and really has special attention for him, he may not be looking to leave next summer like I predicted, and we can all kind of calm down and remember that he is still just 18 years old as well. So first things first for him, finish his preseason tour well, and then be a starter this season for Barca Athletic under Belletti. And as for Guillermo, he didn't have too much time in that game, but the kid still looks the part to me. On the press, right at the top of the box, is really where he's comfortable. He looked nervous, I think, just a bit, and I also thought he looked nervous in his first appearance with the UEFA Youth League last season with Barca and his first few minutes of his debut with Barca Athletic, both of which he was one of the youngest players, or maybe the youngest of all time, with the exception of Lamine Yamal for the UEFA Youth League. But I am looking forward to watching him for the rest of this preseason tour, and I do think he might even get a start somewhere along the line here. And finally, let's talk Toni Fernandez. Of course, that right wing belongs to Lamine Yamal, or Rafinha, or Ferran Torres, or Julian Araujo, or maybe Cancelo, or maybe Olmo. But also, Toni Fernandez is clearly the kid who impressed Flick in terms of expectations to results. I didn't think he'd be anywhere near this preseason team, not because of his future or the talent that he possesses, but just where he was expected to be now. He was with the U18s and then the U19s last season, and I did expect him to play most of the season with U19s or even odd this season, but now I don't know where he's going to be. Because just from the simple eye test of the second half, the change of pace, confidence on the ball, and dangerous left foot all looked really fun and ready for prime time. Lewandowski got a bit frustrated with him when he wasn't serving him balls and he wasn't releasing the ball quick enough in the center of the field for Lewandowski. But an older player getting frustrated at you in that position means that you got yourself in the position to make the mistake. And that tells me that he also, that being Lewandowski, knows what Toni Fernandez is capable of and why he expects that pass to come. And I do think that Toni Fernandez is the one player that I already need to move up that tier list that I just did a few weeks ago. So Toni Fernandez jumps out, and there is one every season. Well, maybe not all the seasons, but in the preseason, you always feel like there's one player. And even last season, the player I guess was Lamine Yamal, was it Gubarsi, was it Fort? But in the preseason, it was honestly Marc Bernal getting jumped up to Barca Athletic and being a regular right away there. So Toni Fernandez coming into the first team for the preseason tour, it has a lot to do with the Euros and all that, but he's making the most of his opportunities. And final note, I guess, good on you under Astalaga for the penalty kick saves and getting the Barcelona the victory. It doesn't matter at all, but hey, you get a preseason win against Man City, and I won't remember who played in this game. Well, maybe I will, but years from now, we'll just see, penalties 2-2 preseason tour against Man City. Yeah, good stuff. It was a great career moment for Astalaga, and the cool penalty from Toni Fernandez to win it, a good moment for him in his young career as well. All right, so I think that's way too many big guesses from one preseason match, the first one at that, and a few days late. So again, this wasn't really a match review, merely the things that I'm going to be looking forward to for the rest of this preseason now, and things that we can learn heading into El Clasico. So remember, join me on the watch along. I'll definitely be there for the second half and for an extended post game where we can have plenty of conversations. And I will likely potentially have people, if there's ones who's been on the show before, people that I know and I trust your camera and all that, you can come on the feed with me as well. So that link is in the description or show notes, and the promo code is holaculers. So until then, as always, again, thanks again for your patience, but I guess I'm back as I can be, and things are going to be better than ever, I guess. And that's just me being optimistic. I want to say that they are because, as always, Forza Barca.